Welcome to the Advisor's Corner podcast. My name is Hector Garcia. I'm an accountant and a business consultant. In this podcast, we interview subject matter experts, small business owners and thought leaders, and small business advisors of any sort that are helping fuel the way business is done both in America and around the world. Today, we're going to interview Kirk Bowman. I'm a big fan of Kirk Bowman. He is the host of the Art of Value podcast. In my opinion, one of the best podcasts out there that talk about value, adding value as a service professional, and how value translates into better prices, which allows both the service professional, the practitioner, and the customer to up the level of satisfaction, increase loyalty, and all around a win-win situation throughout. So look for the Art of Value podcast. I assure you, you're going to absolutely love it. Anyway, Kirk, welcome to the podcast.
Hector, thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely an honor. Like as I said in the introduction, I'm a big fan of your work. Kirk, would you mind taking us through a quick journey on how you ended up doing this podcast?
Certainly. So I've been in software development, custom software development for probably 20 plus years. And so my first exposure to value pricing was when I was a panelist at a technology conference, and I was actually the point of view that said, hey, we've got to do it hourly because we don't know how long it's going to take, and so that's really the only fair way to price it. There was another consultant on the panel who introduced me to value pricing. He said, if you bill by the hour, there's an artificial limit on your income. And I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and the idea that I was doing anything that would limit my income really resonated with me. And so I started on a journey of about 3 months to study value pricing. Based on that 3-month study, I decided to implement it in my software business, and that took about a year. After practicing value pricing for 3 or 4 years in that business, I realized that I had developed a passion for this business model, that I actually had a desire to help other professionals be able to make the switch. And the switch is not easy. I mean, any type of change that involves business model or mindset requires a lot of commitment over time. And so I thought a podcast would be a fun way to do that. I have a background growing up. I was a radio DJ during high school, and so I'm not scared of the microphone. And so I decided to start the podcast as a way to share my experience and also be able to talk to others. So that's kind of the quick history of the podcast. All of that is probably, over about a 6 or 7 year period.
Oh, awesome. And I'm an accountant, so I'm in a profession in which we're really deeply mired into billing by the hour, by the 6 minute increments. However, is it that traditionally our industry does it. And even so, let's say in the last 5 to 10 years or so, there's been a big push for fixed pricing. Now, fixed pricing is not always value pricing because we do price up front many times. But I will tell you, I've been the culprit of taking out a spreadsheet and figuring out how many hours I think it's going to take me and adding some slack, and at the end figuring out what my fixed price is, which has nothing to do with value really. And there's so many complexities behind detecting what the other side of the, let's call it the other side of the negotiation table, values, right? Because the other side of the negotiation table has an entirely different perspective about whatever services or products that they're buying from. So a lot of times we make the mistake, and I've been the culprit of it. And I'm telling you, I'm still in the value pricing transformation journey. And your podcast and the Soul of Enterprise and other podcasts and other resources have helped me tremendously. But it is true that it is a long process. It is a long process, and it's mostly because I think that most of the times we believe that we can detect value from the other side of the table, and we absolutely cannot. I mean, that's something that obviously you've understood from all your guests. And so, just so you know, I'm in part of that journey as well, trying to figure out how to switch from completely charging by the hour to charging based on the value we provide. Now, about your guest speakers, which is really sort of the meat and potatoes of the podcast. well, I'm not downgrading the quality of your work, but I'm saying, you make it centric to their story. Tell me a little bit about the people, the guests of your show, and how you find them, and what the theme behind interviewing a different person is.
So the central theme of the show is to interview other professionals, including authors and speakers who have successfully implemented value pricing. So a lot of the people I interview are actually evangelists for the business model in one way or another. My guests tend to come from four different professions: accounting, design or agencies, software, and then also attorneys. And I have connections in each of those four areas. And so sometimes I can interview my direct connections. So, for example, probably a couple of people your audience will know would be Ron Baker or Ed Kless from VeriSage. I'm good friends with both of them. Ed and I live 5 minutes apart, and so having them on the show was just a direct relationship. Sometimes I will ask somebody who has already been a guest to introduce me to somebody. So, for example, I interviewed Rabbi Daniel Lappin. Well, that was an introduction that was made through Ron Baker. Other times I'll just find somebody either through their book or through their podcast, or sometimes they may be a guest on another show, and I'll just reach out directly. So, for example, I interviewed Blair Enns, who is a big proponent of pricing based on value in the design field. And I just reached out to Blair direct and invited him. So it's really just keeping an open eye for people that I think have a good point of view. And then the other thing that I've really found is helpful is after I have a guest on the show, I will ask them, who's somebody else you think I ought to interview? And I've now, because I've done over 100 episodes, I'm really starting to get some really great referrals and introductions just because I asked that question. So it's a combination of, direct relationships, just keeping my eyes open, and then also asking.
Sure, and some of your guests resonate with some of my own stories in my profession, and in some cases, I hear them talk about their struggles with a particular customer or a particular proposal, and then I think, you know what, I went to that same situation, and I find it kind of interesting that they took this approach and it worked. Things that I would never think would work in the first place. So I love the fact that I'm hearing someone from the IT industry, from the design industry, uh, uh, from the legal profession that are having similar struggles that we thought, or I thought, were 100% unique to my industry. So that's one particular thing that I really like. If you don't mind, I want to talk to you about a couple of guests. There's two particular guests that I liked. I would say these are my two favorite episodes. One of them is Rabbi Lappin. Um, Not a person that I can connect with at all because I'm not very religious myself. For one, and two, because it's just not really in a profession in which I can say, "Oh, okay, we went through a similar journey." However, what he says is just so simple and so amazing at the same time. And I strongly recommend that if you're listening to this, and whether you listen to rabbis or not, this is a person that you got to listen to, at least in this particular episode. This is episode 100, I believe. And
That's right. It was a special episode. It was a
yeah,
celebratory episode, and so you're exactly right.
and the questions you asked were like, I was like, what is Kirk doing? What kind of questions are these? You remember the questions, right? What is money?
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is money? Right? What is work? I mean, very simple things. I mean,
Well, I took typically when I interview a guest, I will either use their book or a blog article or other source material that they put out as a catalyst for the conversation. I use that to help prepare. Well, in this particular instance, Rabbi Lappin published a book called 40 Business Secrets from the Bible.
right.
And so I read that book and I took a lot of those questions out of the book. Now, one of the things that when you listen to Rabbi Lappin is you realize he is very much into what is the history of language. Particularly, a lot of language comes out of the Hebrew language because it's one of the oldest languages we have.
Of course.
And so, yes, I wanted to start with him by saying, well, yes, what is money? What is wealth? And get his perspective on where did the definition of the word come from? And just his insight on simple questions like that are pretty profound.
Yeah, I think that many a times we take a concept that could be abstract. I think value is one of those highly abstract concepts, right? You can't draw it on a piece of paper. Draw value, right? You can't draw that, right? Or you can't picture it. This is extremely subjective, extremely spiritual, I would say, in many ways. And you speak or you hear someone that's a rabbi, right? That's to talk about business in a very deep spiritual way. It was just very different for me. I really liked that. Really appreciate that guest and the line of questioning you had. The other episode that I really like was Tim Williams. Tim Williams, a fellow at the VeraSage Institute, which I believe you're one too, right? You're part of the VeraSage Institute.
Yes, it's always fun to say that Tim and I are fellow fellows.
Exactly, fellow fellows, and Ron Baker as well, and Ed Kless, which will be on an episode shortly. Tim is an advertising guy, and he coined the phrase "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas," or his firm did, right?
That's
And
correct.
and you asked him, and I think in other podcasts that I heard him speak, people ask him, and it's like, can you just imagine the lasting value that that phrase has had, not just from a commercial standpoint, but this is pop culture. I mean, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It's part of our language. It's the excuse that not I don't do it, but that friends give to other friends, saying, "Hey, let's go to Vegas." What happens there stays there. It has transcended the commercial aspects of it. And then you ask him, "Hey, did you build that by the hour?" Or did you build that based on value? And he said, well, sadly, this is the business model we had before. We build that by the hour. So I just think that that's just incredibly interesting. How you can see the two contrasts of something so powerful and so great, and then also commercially speaking, just not being built correctly. I think.
Well, it's a great example of when you're billing by the hour, you're not even thinking about what the potential value is for the customer. You're not even asking those questions. And so when you're not even asking, you have the potential to leave a huge amount of money on the table. Also, if you're not focusing on value, it's actually damaging to you and the customer, and we can get into that later. But it's just a great example of how, Tim did a great campaign, but because there was no thinking about the long-reaching value of it, it was extremely underpriced. Other thing that I like about that story is it's a great example of even somebody who's so good at it now has made mistakes.
Sure.
And so there shouldn't be any guilt or shame from how you're pricing now. There should just be the courage to price better.
No, absolutely. And he's really big into positioning as something that we have to understand as an abstract concept, and as a both strategic and tactical move that we have to make as business owners. And I've heard it in college and stuff. I never heard it used in such a practical manner. The way he uses it. I believe he calls it the magic of pricing or something like that. I forget what the exact title was, but I loved it. So I think those two episodes, like if you want to get started with the art of value, from my perspective, if you kind of like the stuff that I like, start with those two episodes and go from there. I mean, they're not similar at all, but I think they both cover the spectrums of of a hugely successful person that has made mistakes and has evolved from it, and then someone that has nothing to do with business in terms of how most of us think of like a rabbi talk about business in such a clear way. So I appreciate you having those two guests, by the way.
Well, thank you. And just to make this easy for your audience, they can find those episodes. The one with Rabbi is artofvalue.com/100, so 100. And the one with Tim Williams is artofvalue.com/34.
Okay, so you do artofvalue.com slash the number of the episode, and that's how you go straight to it. I like to make
Correct.
another note, kind of an infomercial for you. After the show on that website, you put show notes. So if there's any links, any articles, maybe even contact information from the guest, that's all in there. And by the way, I want to make the time to do it for this podcast, but that's also really valuable. So I want to add extra appreciation for that. Anyway, I want to move into kind of the mantra of your podcast, which is it's part of your intro. It's part of like the voiceover music in the background. It says discover value, create options, and start pricing. What I like you to do is kind of unpack that and convert that into like a business process. so the mantra or the slogan of your podcast, what does that look like as a business process? If someone wanted to uh, follow what you say, follow your gospel, and move into value pricing, or not so much value pricing, value driven business, and then allow pricing to kind of fall into place. That's the way I see it. But can you talk about discover value, create options, and start pricing as a business process?
Certainly. So I wanted to try to boil down what I thought the key elements of the value pricing business model were. Obviously, number one, to be able to have some type of catchphrase that people could remember. But also, I just wanted to say, look, there's a lot to the business model, but these are the three pillars that I think it's built on. You might think of it as a tripod. So let's talk about discover value. And I use the word discover intentionally because value is very often hidden. Not hidden intentionally, but hidden because it's not on the surface. Now let's define what we mean by value. We mean, as you alluded earlier, we want to discover value from the customer's perspective. It's not what I think the value is, it's what the customer has told me the value is. Now, I still have to make a judgment. It's not that the customer says a number and I take that number at face value, but I ask them questions and get their perspective. What do they think we're going to accomplish together? If we accomplish it, what does success look like? How is that going to put their business in a better position than they are in now? In other words, what does it look like if you don't do this? Why are you doing this now? Why didn't you do it 6 months ago, or why not wait another 6 months? How's this going to impact your revenue? How's this going to impact your profit? Is this going to have any effect on sales as far as number of leads? I also want to ask about intangible things, such as, is this going to allow you to go from working, 60 hours a week to 40 hours a week? Is this going to allow you to take your first vacation in 2 years? You want to get into all of that, and the answers to those questions will help you understand what's important to them. And that's really what value is. Value winds up being what's important to the customer. A lot of times customers won't say it off the bat, or two, they don't even know. They actually need you to prompt them. So when I say discover value, it's that idea of asking great questions to uncover what's important to them. So that's kind of the first pillar. And that's something we have to practice. That's a skill we can build. The second, create options. It's the idea that when you present a proposal to work with a customer, if you just give them one choice, you're essentially giving them an ultimatum. They can either take it or leave it. It's a yes or no. It's binary. It's either true or false. If you offer them choices, there's a subtle shift that happens in the mind of the customer. It goes from will I work with you to how will I work with you. It helps usher in the idea, I'm going to work with you, now I just need to decide at what level. How much assistance do I need? And if you think about choices, we see it every day. If you go through the drive-thru for lunch, even something as simple as a combo at a fast food restaurant, they're probably going to say, well, do you want that small, medium, and large? That's a choice of 3 right there. You'll see it in SaaS software all over the place. We've seen these pricing tables where they offer you 3 options, right? And it might be, standard, pro, and premium, or whatever they want to call them.
Right.
You'll see these ideas of choices. Even the plumbing company that I use, when they come out to replace my garbage disposal, they offered me a real basic one that was better, and then kind of a top of the line. Of course, I picked the one in the middle, and that's one of the reasons you offer 3 options is because statistically customers will pick the middle option. Why? Well, most people don't want to buy the lowest, okay? The quality winds up being more important than the money, and also at the same token, most people are not going to pick the most expensive, although some people will. So when you offer 3 choices, it just changes the conversation in the customer's mind, and it allows them, number one, to receive more value from working with you, but then in turn allows you to receive a higher profit because you're being paid more because they picked a higher option than just your base level. The other thing about creating options is it forces you to actually be creative. In other words, sometimes you really have to think, what options can I offer this customer? And some of the best ideas I've come up with in my business were because I forced myself to think outside the box. So that's create options. And then start pricing. If you've discovered value well and you've offered the customer three great options, then you're going to make it much easier to price. Now, the reason I say start pricing is because most people don't price. Most people bill. So what's the difference between pricing and billing? Well, billing is done in arrears. Okay, so I track my hours, I send the customer an invoice, and I hope they pay it and don't question my time entries. That's billing. You've done the work, and then you're sending an invoice to collect the money. With pricing, you tell the customer up front how much it's going to be, and you don't do the work unless they pay you. And in some instances, you don't start work until you're paid 100%. In fact, in my software business, I get 70 to 80%, or my customers pay 100% up front 70 to 80% of the time. So that's one of the big advantages of pricing. And I say start pricing because just like discovering value, it's a skill you can learn. And so I think we all have to become great students of pricing. We need to develop that skill just like an accountant is going to work on developing their skill as a CPA or using a certain platform. So those are the three pillars.
And pricing, just to go back for a second, pricing is not coming up with a price and that's it. I think pricing is it's really deep, and I've learned that I this has been an incredible last 5 years for me, understanding that pricing is not a number you put on a paper. Pricing has so many connotations, and there's so much psychology behind it. There are two particular books, and maybe you'll agree with me, and maybe add more books. There are two particular books that I believe that help you understand pricing, it being both an art and a science. One is called Pricing on Purpose by Ron Baker, by our mutual friend Ron Baker, and the other one is called The Strategy and Tactics of Pricing by Thomas Nagel. Those two books I read, and it helped me realize that pricing is both. I think it's both an art and a science, but it's deeper than what I previously understood what pricing was. So that's why you have pricing as a third layer of it, saying it's not discover value and give a price. It's be in the world of pricing, and pricing it being almost like a department or a discipline within your business. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yes, I say it's a skill that you can learn just like your craft. And so, for example, the strategy and tactics of pricing, that's not necessarily the first book on pricing I would recommend, but it is considered kind of the Bible of pricing. That's the book that people like Ron Baker, who's written other books on pricing, will refer to. And the authors of that book, Thomas Nagel and Reed Holden on some of the earlier versions, are two of the deepest minds in pricing in our country. They
Right.
teach pricing at the academic level in graduate school. So that book, pretty much anything Ron's written. A couple others that I would add. There's a consultant named Alan Weiss, and Alan has written a book called Value-Based Fees, which is also a very good read. He also has another one that, particularly on the mindset side, I think helps, called Million Dollar Consulting.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to position yourself as a consultant, that's a great book, not only about pricing, but about the mindset of being a true consultant. Another book, and this one's a real easy read. In fact, this one's available online for free. If you go to winwithoutpitching.com, that's Blair Ann's website, and he's written a book called The Win Without Pitching Manifesto. And it's a book, you'll be able to read it like,
Mm.
an hour, hour and a half. And so it's a quick read. And it's not necessarily a book on pricing, but it's a book on mindset. So he goes through 12 principles. And so, for example, he says, we will replace, I'm trying to remember it, but something like we will replace presentations with conversations. And basically, it's the whole idea of how do you approach business so if the customer's coming to you, you're choosing whether to do business with them. They see you as an expert, and the discussion is not about pricing. The discussion is about value and the expertise that you have and how that can help them. So those are some books that, in addition to the two you mentioned, the one by Alan Weiss and the one by Blair Hans, I think are very good.
Yeah, win. So that's Win Without Pitching Manifesto.
Yes.
Okay.
And the website is just winwithoutpitching.com.
I just bought it on Amazon. I just while you were speaking, it was great. Gotta love Amazon. Anyway, so yeah, I really appreciate that. Now, I want to talk about options for a second. I just want to kind of discuss a personal experience that I had. Um, if you only give a person one option, then assuming that you're in a competitive situation, they're going to compare your one option with your competitor's one option as well. So all of a sudden, it's you got 50. Let's just call it that. You got 50% chance at landing the deal. But if you're dealing with competitors that maybe don't give three choices, and you give three choices, plus you got two other competitors, you got three choices against two, you still got 3/5 of a chance to win the deal. So I find that choices helps you compete against yourself for the client's business. Now, it would be you possibly in a different capacity, or you in a different engagement, or you in a different way. So I'm telling you, the minute I started introducing options, everything changed. And it's funny, me and my partners, we speak about deals that we think they're going to take it, we think they're not going to take it. The ones that we think they're not going to take it end up taking the highest choice. And sometimes we price them like, you know what, let's just price it to lose it because they're
Hmm.
asking for way too much and then end up saying yes. And we're like, oh, time to allocate some resources to this project. So I just found that that's fascinating. And of course, it's not always going to work. People are not always going to pick the highest one. Some people will pick the lowest one. Most people, like you said, will pick the middle one. But it's those few that pick the top one that you priced not to sell, that end up being the ones that give you the most revenue. Also, obviously, bigger responsibility. But those are the ones that make you pump your fist in the air and usually come as a really nice surprise because you don't think sometimes they're going to take it and they end up taking it. Now, one thing I'll tell you, and you tell me from your experience, I found that the bombshell for getting the highest price is inserting something in it, a magic word, which is the word unlimited. Now, the word unlimited to any service provider, especially an accountant during tax season, it's scary. Giving anyone unlimited anything, whether it's unlimited pens or unlimited emails or unlimited phone calls or unlimited meetings, unlimited anything is scary for most of us because we tend to use our time as inventory. So, like any business that's in the all you can eat business, giving anyone an all you can eat, what they're really afraid is that although not everybody, cleans out the buffet, there's usually a few guys that can clean out the buffet. And those are the ones that you make sure that there's only a few, right? So this all you can eat business, whether it's in the service world or in the food or whatever, it tends to have an interesting psychology on people. I think that for the most part, the people that are not going to consume more than the average anyway, they walk in saying, you know what, I just want to know how much it is and not think about my overage. Think about what happened in the phone industry, unlimited, right? The phone industry in the past 15 years has been fighting for unlimited in different contexts. We have unlimited texts, unlimited data, unlimited minutes. You remember, I mean, I think you remember not too long ago, we counted the minutes in our cell phones. We were looking at it, we're like, oh, we have 1,000 minutes, and we have 200 left, and there's 3 days left for the day. I better, budget my phone calls. And then that went away. The minute one carrier inserted unlimited talk time, everything changed. I believe the whole industry changed. And now, then they started fighting for data, or no, text, then data, and so forth. So I believe that word unlimited has a very strong uh, reaction on people's psyche. What's your experience with this unlimited offering?
Well, you mentioned the first thing that pops into the mind of a service provider is my time is inventory, and now I'm going to give away unlimited amounts of my inventory. So let's tackle that for a minute. First of all, time is irrelevant. Customers don't care how long it takes. And if you're billing by the hour and you get faster, you make less money. That makes no sense. The better you are, the more money you should make. So let's just agree that the time you put into it's irrelevant. In fact, if you can provide it faster than somebody else, you should charge more. Think about business cards. You order business cards from a printer, it's a 5-day turnaround, but if you need them in 24 hours, they're happy to do it for you, but they're going to charge you a premium. And I guarantee you most of that premium they charge is not because it's more expensive to produce it in 24 hours. It's because it's more profit for them
Yeah,
because they are providing more value for the
right,
quick turnaround.
right.
So I just, quickly want to dispense with this idea that time means something. It's irrelevant. The second thing is the idea that if you offer unlimited access, and that's really when you're a service professional, typically when you use unlimited, you're offering unlimited access to you in one or more means. What do I mean by means? Well, it could be in-person meetings, it could be online meetings, it could be phone, it could be email, it could be text, it could be just during the business day or on weekends or nights or so forth. Well, the type of customers you want and the type of customers that you're probably going to attract when you're doing value pricing are not the ones that are going to try to take advantage of you. In fact, nobody can use, quote, unlimited. We all have to do other things,
Right.
okay? If nothing else, we have to sleep. So it's not
Sure.
like somebody can take advantage of that. So I think we have to just go on faith and trust from those who've gone before us that when you offer a customer unlimited access, it's actually a benefit to both of you. It's a benefit to them because they can pick up the phone and call you or email you whenever they want, ask you whatever question they need, and know they're going to get a response from you. But the other thing, the thing that we don't think about is if the customer's talking to you more often, what do you think is going to be the outcome from that? You're going to wind up doing more business with them because they're going to bring more problems, issues, concerns, and opportunities to you, and you're going to then be able to translate that into additional work. Just because you offer unlimited access doesn't mean that you are going to be giving away stuff for free. It just means you're agreeing to have a conversation. And sometimes the conversation, you may be offering tactical or strategic advice. Other times you may be going, yeah, that's a problem. Here are some ways we could solve that. Are you interested in pursuing those?
Right. Right.
Right? So just, yes, I agree. I think when you offer a customer unlimited access, what you're really doing is you're saying, I'm invested in you. I want to be a partner, not a vendor. And I don't want you thinking about your wallet every time you contact me. I want you to reach out to me as often as you want. You're not a bother. You're not an aggravation. You are my customer, and I value you. And one of the ways I prove that is you can tap my brain. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be for free, but it does mean you have access to me when we sign an agreement that says for the next 6 months, you can call me and we'll have a phone call, right? And that's part of the value you can offer.
And I would say reserve unlimited for your premium option. You know, I'm not sure in what situation you would start with unlimited because then that's kind of the cap, right? I believe that that's, infinite is the biggest number that you can put on a paper, right? So I would say unlimited shouldn't be on all three options. I mean, I believe that um, there may be some context in which unlimited is completely given, but I'm saying in most service situations, I think unlimited would be like your best option. I mean, you have warranties and guarantees, and unlimited plays into that. And you recently had a guest, I forgot the name, but we won't get too much detail into that. But they were talking about using the risks that we take as a service professional as a way of pricing or setting a price. And risks could be different, not necessarily a risk like I'm going to lose something of monetary value, but I can have a risk of not completing the job and having to, let's say, refund it to save face, or a risk of having to allocate a whole bunch of resources to get it done, or a risk of even losing your license over doing something wrong or unethical that the client is forcing you to do, or the risk of exposing the client into doing something that could put them at risk, and you're sort of, as a service professional, transferring some of that risk over to you, or is implied by your relationship that that risk is being transferred. And this happens in accounting all the time. People go to an accountant and sometimes they pay a higher amount to another accountant because it gives them the impression that the accountant will take a risk if they get audited, for example. And that's not even, sometimes it's not even part of the conversation where people say, well, for this amount, if I get audited, you protect me, right? And it's one of those interesting things that if you don't have that conversation, people have this misperception. So what's your thought about the role that risk has on pricing?
So I think it was, oh, I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, there's an author who says all profit comes from risk.
All profit.
All right.
Okay.
Peter Drucker, that's the name I'm trying to think of. He said all profit comes from risk. So when you begin to look at risk as an opportunity instead of as something negative, that's where it takes on this idea of it can actually create profit for you and profit for the customer. So let's talk about kind of two aspects of risk, their risk and your risk. You're taking on risk just because you are an entrepreneur. In fact, the word entrepreneur means to undertake. It actually comes from a French word, that was referring to funerals and undertakers. And what do we do as entrepreneurs? We undertake risk. So we are risk takers just because we're in business. And you have to have some courage and bravery to get into business. You just have to. Now, the risk where there's the most opportunity is actually in the customer's risk, because the customer will pay a premium for you to take on their risk. And before you reject this idea too much, realize we all buy insurance. Okay, we're required by law in the U.S. to carry liability insurance to drive an automobile. Most of us, if we own a home, you're required to have homeowners insurance as part of having a mortgage. What are we doing in those instances? We're paying a monthly premium, which, by the way, I really admire the insurance industry. They have, the balls, pardon me, to call it a premium. They don't call it a price. They call it a premium. You are paying us a premium to assume risk. And what is the risk they're assuming? Well, for car insurance, they're assuming the liability in case there's injury or property damage. In the home, there could be fire, there could be tornado, or in my case, I've had to replace the roof on my home twice in the last 10 years due to hail. Well, I'm certainly glad that I just had to pay like $1,000 deductible instead of the $15,000 it cost to put a new roof on, right? So the idea that if you take on risk for the customer, they will pay a premium for it. Well, how do you take on risk? Well, you gave a great example of it. You yourself said, hey, at this level, if you get audited, I'll be there for you, no extra charge. What are you really offering to the customer? Insurance.
Peace of mind.
What are you doing? Peace of mind is another way to describe it. That's really what insurance is. It's peace of mind. And it's transfer of risk. They're transferring risk from themselves to you. So that's kind of the customer's view of risk. And customers will pay a premium for certainty. That's another way to say it. Now, let's talk about your area of risk, because I think you also have to account what is the risk you're taking by engaging with this customer. If there's higher risk, you should be paid more. Even if it's not a transfer of risk from them to you, if you just know, for example, and I don't do this, but if you're an accountant for a questionable business, let's just say a business that operates on the fringe, they're not illegal, but they're operating in an area where it may be gray, you better be charging more because you're taking on more risk.
Sure.
Okay? Or if a customer's just difficult to deal with. I talked to a customer a couple weeks on the phone, and I was like, oh my goodness, the guy will not be quiet. He just talks and talks and talks and talks. And I was like, if I do business with this guy, it's going to expend my emotional energy to interact with him. So I'm going to charge a price. And by the way, if you have a difficult customer, the reason the customer feels difficult is because you didn't charge enough to deal with them, or you shouldn't have dealt with them ever. But I think at least 50% of the time, if you were being paid more and like a lot more, like 25 to 50% more, all of a sudden that customer wouldn't feel like a problem customer. Why? Because in your gut, in your heart, you realize there's an inequity. You realize you're taking on more risk than you're being compensated. So those are the two views of risk.
Yeah, and I was in finance before I became an accountant, and I just want to maybe some fun fact. Premium is actually a finance term for value in excess of par value, so it's actually a finance term. It's not just ballsy insurance industry calling it premium. Although I see what you're saying from a customer's perspective. It's like, oh, I'm paying a premium. Now, premium is actually the technical finance term for excess value above par value or above face value. So that's technically why they call it a premium. But there's another interesting quote. I hate when I say a quote and I say somebody smart said this, but I don't know who it is. But it was, there's no bad risk. There's just a bad premium. Okay, it's exactly what you said. There's no bad deal. It's just that you didn't charge enough to compensate for the risk. And so often we don't think about risk, but it's innately built into everything we do. As you said, entrepreneur comes from, paraphrasing, the art or the action of undertaking risk. And any finance person or investment person will always tell you that your rewards are going to be a function of your risk, right? The bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. I mean, that's just how it works. That's how life functions in general. Business, life, financing, investing, it's all going to be a function of risk. Anyway, I know we're running towards the end of the podcast here. I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to kind of ask you a question that you ask all of your guests in your show. You ask, this is at the beginning, and this is kind of like how you introduce the beginning, and this kind of sets the mood, I believe, or sets the pace, or sets the environment for the entire 1 hour podcast, is typically what they are. You ask, first thing you ask, and I'm sure you ask it throughout the conversation, but you edit it and put it at the beginning. I think that's what you do. But you ask, what is the most important thing you can tell me about pricing? So before you answer that, I know you have at least 110 answers from guests, and you may have your own answer that you had before the podcast, and maybe you have a new modified answer. So everything goes. If you want to answer your own, your new and improved answer, or maybe your favorite one from a guest. What is the most important thing you can tell me about pricing?
If I had to sum it up, it would be 2 words: charge more. That's the
Okay.
best pricing advice I can give you. Charge more. Because studies have shown, and this is for Fortune 500 companies, that as little as a 1% increase in price can lead to a 10% increase in profit. So we're talking about a 1% increase in revenue leads to a 10% increase in profit. How can that be? Well, because a lot of times when you increase your price, and this is especially true for service professionals, you're just adding profit to the bottom line. Now, in a lot of those cases, you're probably undercharging. So you're actually you are not capturing enough as a price for the value you're creating. So I would say charge more. Now, that doesn't just mean you send out an email and you go, hey, I'm doubling my rates. No. And that's why we talk about creating value so much, because when you align with the customer based on value, as you raise the value for the customer, you create the ability to raise your prices as well. But my best advice, charge more.
So if I understand this correctly, and let me kind of just go through the way I interpret this. Charge more because as a service professional, you will have now more responsibility to do more or do better. The client is going to have higher expectation from you. In some cases, they may ask for more than they would ask otherwise if they were paying low value, or let's say low price. And it's a positive vicious cycle. I don't know how to say what's the opposite of vicious cycle, but it's a snowfall positive effect to put yourself in the mind frame that I'm going to charge more because I will give more. In terms, my entire business model gets re-engineered into focusing on figuring that value, creating it. The client will be happier because we actually solved the bigger problems of what some people call it the more expensive problems. And the clients will be deeper into their relationship with you because not only they're more invested monetarily, but maybe the whole mantra of charge more push them into a different way that they'll work with you. Would you say that's a good interpretation of it?
Yes, I think your summarization is dead on. Something I would add is another reason I say charge more is because it is human nature to undervalue ourselves. And we could have a whole podcast on why that is. But you think about it, when you grow up and you're learning about money, at least in the US, for example, my daughter's around 10, 11, and she's asked me recently, well, how much do you make? Or Dad, how much does that car cost? Well, or how much do we have in our bank account? Well, I have to say, look, that's you're not quite ready to know that yet. I need to, I would be happy to teach you about money. Let's set you up with an allowance. But, how much I make, that you're not ready for that. Why? Well, you probably don't understand that
Right.
money and finance in general is a private topic, right? It's something we don't talk about, with everybody we first meet. That mindset carries over to the way we approach pricing. Unfortunately, money in a business is not the same as money in your personal life. One of the things that we have to realize is people who don't talk about money don't make money. So if you're scared of having a pricing conversation, if you're scared of really pushing yourself to charge more, human nature is to undervalue. And so that's one of the reasons I say charge more is I just want to get people to start thinking about wherever you're at, start raising your prices because there are 90% of the time only going to be positive effects from that.
Sure, sure. And the if you were to ask me that question,
All right. So Hector, what's the most important thing you can share about pricing?
I would say expectations. One word, expectations. I believe that pricing sets an expectation. I believe that both parties, if they're paying more than they wanted to pay, and somebody's getting paid more than what they thought they were going to get paid, I think both get automatically escalated to a different level. And I think the other way around as well. I believe that when the service practitioner goes low, so for example, the client just keeps negotiating with you, or you're in a price war and you had to outbid someone. I believe that when you price low, your general expectation is, hey, I'm not gonna do that much for them. I price low. It's happened to me and my psyche. I've had some clients that have told me, Hector, charge me more, like literally, charge me more, and they see my face like, and they look at me and they hold my hand and they say, but take care of me. You know what? That's not every client is like that, but those are the ones that make you think. I go back 8 years of practice. How much money have I left on the table? Not detecting that they want to hear. I'll take care of you. Here's the price. Expectation. I believe that's a 36-year-old and 8 years of practice as an entrepreneur. It is the one thing that I've learned to be the most important thing. Anyway, thank you for asking that. By the way, I felt like I was in your podcast for like 10 seconds. Were you going to add something?
Well, I was just going to add that, and to be honest, I forgot what I was going to add, so never mind.
That's fine. So to wrap this up, a couple of things. I was going to ask you about your favorite books. I think you mentioned a couple. Um, are there any other books that you haven't mentioned, resources, or other favorite podcasts that inspire you, whether it's on this topic or any other topics, inspire you to just be a better business person, a better business leader, or even a better person altogether?
So I'm going to pull up my list of podcasts that I listen to see if I were going to recommend one, which one it might be. So I was thumbing through them here. Well, yeah, I don't know why I didn't think of this one. So Rabbi Lappin has a podcast.
Yep.
Um, and it's basically him going on for sometimes 90 minutes, 2 hours,
Sure.
from what he calls ancient Jewish wisdom.
Yep.
He is a Jewish rabbi. He knows the Jewish scriptures, and so he'll talk about politics, or he'll
Yes.
talk about family, or he'll talk about raising children, or he'll talk about money. He talks about everyday things in life from the perspective of ancient Jewish wisdom. So that would be one that I would recommend. That's one I draw a lot from, and sometimes it's business, sometimes it's personal, but I've never listened to an episode of his that I didn't get a ton of value out of.
I agree with
If
that
there's
one.
another if there's another book that I would recommend, it is actually one that I'm listening to right now through Audible called The One Thing, and it talks about how do you, number one, identify what your one thing is, and then how do you make sure that you don't get distracted, derailed in the pursuit of that one thing. And that's a book that I'm really enjoying. It's not necessarily everything in the book is new, but it's presented in fresh perspectives and in a format that is wrapped up in a way that I haven't heard before. And so, particularly if you're interested in productivity, or you feel like you don't have a focus, you feel like you're just going all over the place, The One Thing.
Sure. And in terms of, let's just call it deeper learning, I think both of us are maybe in a privileged position in which we created platforms in which we have now the discipline to have certain discussions on the table, have the discipline to look for different speakers and different point of views, and that the discipline for both of us to make time to do these things. I mean, either myself or you have a direct commercial transaction from doing these podcasts. But I think both of us will agree we do this because even if it takes us a whole hour or 2 hours, where we get one little piece of nugget that just you know adds to our own personal value, it actually multiplies into plenty afterwards. But not everybody has a platform, like a podcast or a webinar, and most of the times they're in the listening end. You talk a lot about mastermind groups, and I'd like to ask you, for the people listening, what are some mastermind groups or mastermind group tips, or if you can explain it real quick, that you recommend people to get involved with and finding the right one? And I believe you have a mastermind group as well, so discuss that as well.
So let's start by defining what a mastermind is. Mastermind, the term, comes from Napoleon Hill. He has written or wrote a book. He's no longer alive, but he is an author who wrote a book, among several others, called Think and Grow Rich. And he introduces this term of the mastermind, that when you have two or more individuals that are coming together for the mutual benefit of each other, that there is the creation of essentially a third mind. That, in other words, when you have two people talking about something, it's not just brain power times two, it's actually brain power times three, that it's exponential, because there is this perception of, when they come together, the creation of a third mind that helps them generate things that they would never come up with on their own. So nowadays, a typical mastermind group is usually around 5 or 6 individuals that meet together on some regular basis. It can be online, it can be in person, it can be weekly, monthly, and so forth. They come in all different formats. In some sense, it's, you've probably heard people talk about, if you really want to grow, have a business coach. Well, a mastermind is another form of coaching in a sense. It's an informal way of coaching. But let's say, for example, I'm dealing with a difficult customer, or I'm trying to put a proposal together and I'm having trouble coming up with a third option, or I'm not sure how to set the price. Well, one of the things you can do is go to the mastermind group and say, hey, here's the challenge I have. How would you suggest that I solve this? And you're probably going to get 4 or 5 different ideas. You may pick one of those ideas. You may wind up coming up with your own idea based on something that somebody else in the group says. So a mastermind can be extremely valuable. Now, how do you find them? Well, one way is if you're hanging out in forums. For example, if you're hanging about some forums, for QuickBooks or some other accounting site, if you're active in those forums and you know some other people that are, you might just be able to approach them and say, hey, I'd like to try a mastermind group. Would you be willing to start one with me? And you just start one that's free. Now, I found in my experience that the best masterminds are ones that I pay to be a part of.
Right.
Why? Because when you put skin in the game, you're going to show up. If it's free, people, I'd rather go have Starbucks, with a friend than, get with the mastermind group this week or whatever. So a paid one would be the way that I would go. Now, there are some good paid ones. There are some, just like anything else, you have to really make sure that you're getting in the right mastermind. Do your research ahead of time, talk to people who've already part of the mastermind, and then maybe try to give yourself a trial period. But I think paid masterminds are very much worth it. In fact, you mentioned I have one, and I'm actually going to be starting up a new group. It's not a group that I'm necessarily going to be a part of as a member of the mastermind. I'm going to be facilitating the mastermind, and it's actually going to be targeted for accounting professionals. So it's a mastermind group. I'm looking to have 5 or 6 accountants who would be interested in meeting with me online on a weekly basis. And the idea is going to be primarily to help them implement value pricing in their business. Now, we'll certainly talk about other things. For example, we could talk about, as you suggested, building a platform, or how do you determine positioning or focus, etc. But the primary idea is going to be to have this group come together because they want to implement value pricing. So if you're more interested in that, you can certainly reach out to me, Kirk, K-I-R-K, at artofvalue.com. Or you can contact me through the website, which is just artofvalue.com.
Perfect, Kirk. That was the last question here on my list, and I think we just hit the hour. First of all, thank you very much for coming in. I would love to have you again and have deeper discussions, particularly about options. I believe that's an area that just is just fascinating, the psychology and history of how different companies present different options, good, better, best, etc. So I will have an open invitation for that, and we'll discuss that later on. So definitely appreciate you coming here. Appreciate you sharing all your knowledge. How would people get in contact with you? I know you give your email, but how would people get in contact with you or be exposed to all the things that you do if they wanted to reach you other than email?
Sure. So if you're interested in the podcast, just go to artofvalue.com/show. If you want to see what episodes we have that are specifically for the accounting profession, you can go to artofvalue.com/accounting.
Okay.
I'll give my email address again because I encourage people to reach out and contact me. It's simply kirk@artofvalue.com. And then I'm also on Twitter @artofvalue. So would welcome somebody to reach out to me through any of those means. And I just appreciate you having me as a guest. It's a fun conversation.
Awesome, Kirk. Thank you very much. Have an awesome day.
Thank you.